Don't just watch the drama, be part of it. Hit subscribe now and never miss the next twist.
The morning sun crept slowly over the Texas prairie, spilling its first light across acres of dust, mesquite trees, and the weathered wooden fences of the Torres ranch. For generations, this land had been more than soil and grass. It was memory, survival, and legacy. Elena Torres stood on the porch, boots planted firmly against the creaking wood, a mug of black coffee warming her hands. From here she could see everything. Her cattle grazing in the distance, the barn her father had built by hand, the endless horizon that had always whispered freedom. It should have been a morning like any other. But the dust cloud rolling up the dirt road told her otherwise. A black SUV, polished and out of place against the rugged backdrop, slowed to a stop at her gate. Two men in suits stepped out, their shoes sinking into the dry earth. Elena frowned. Men like that didn't belong here. Not on her land. She set the coffee down, squaring her shoulders as they approached. One carried a leather briefcase. The other held a thick envelope. The taller of the two adjusted his tie and offered a tight smile that carried no warmth. "Mrs. Torres." "Miss," Elena corrected, her voice low and steady. "What's this about?" The man with the envelope cleared his throat. "We're here on behalf of Sullivan Energy Holdings. You've been served." He extended the papers like a final verdict. Elena didn't reach for them. The ranch wind lifted the edges of the envelope, snapping them like a warning flag. Finally she took it, tearing it open with calloused fingers. The words were blunt, legal, merciless. Notice of eminent domain. Effective immediately. This property will be acquired for public use under the Sullivan Energy Clean Future Initiative. Her pulse pounded. She read the line again, slower, hoping the meaning might change. Didn't. Her ranch, her father's land, her daughter's inheritance. It was being stripped away with the stroke of a pen. "This is my home," Elena said, her voice edged with steel. "My family's been here for 3 generations. The taller man sighed, as though he'd rehearsed this. "We understand this is difficult. But progress requires sacrifice. You'll be compensated fairly. Twice the market value." Elena looked past him at the cattle, the barn, the weathered fences her father's hands had built. Market value couldn't price her father's sweat, or her daughter's laughter echoing across the fields. Money couldn't replace the nights she'd fought to keep the ranch alive through drought and debt. "Tell Jack Sullivan he'll have to come take it from me himself," she snapped, shoving the papers back into the man's chest. They didn't flinch. They had expected defiance. The shorter one scribbled something on a clipboard, then tucked the notice back into his briefcase. "You have 30 days to vacate. After that, demolition begins." The SUV pulled away, leaving behind only a swirl of dust and the echo of finality. Elena stood there, fists trembling, the taste of iron in her mouth. For a long moment silence hung heavy. Then from behind her came the creak of the screen door. "Mama!" Maya's voice. Her daughter had arrived home late last night, exhausted from law school finals, but determined to spend the summer at the ranch. She stepped onto the porch, her dark hair tied back neatly, a blazer still draped over her arm from travel. Her eyes searched her mother's face, then darted to the papers. "What happened?" Elena didn't speak. She simply handed over the envelope. She watched as Maya's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to outrage. "They can't do this," Maya whispered. "This isn't justice. This is theft." "It's power," Elena said flatly. "And men like Sullivan know how to use it." Maya shook her head, clutching the papers like they might burn her fingers. "We'll fight it. I'll fight it. They don't get to erase us." Elena studied her daughter, the determination blazing in her eyes, the same fire she'd carried at that age. For a fleeting second, hope cracked through the storm. But she also knew Jack Sullivan. Everyone in Texas did. The billionaire CEO, smooth as silk, ruthless as iron. A man who built empires out of loopholes and crushed anyone who stood in his way. The fight ahead wasn't fair. Never would be. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of her father's words. Land isn't just land, Mija. It's blood. You don't sell blood. You protect it. The horizon stretched endless before her, glowing under the unforgiving Texas sun. The ranch was hers, but for how long? She didn't know. What she did know was this. Sullivan Energy had just declared war. And Elena Torres had never once walked away from a fight. By late afternoon, word had spread across the county like wildfire. In a place as small as Rio Verde, Texas, nothing stayed quiet for long. The notice Elena had received that morning wasn't just about her ranch. It was about everyone's land. And Sullivan Energy knew it. The community hall on Main Street was already overflowing by the time Elena and Maya arrived. Old trucks lined the dirt parking lot, horses tied at the posts, and men and women crowded the steps, talking over each other in heated tones. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and fear. Inside, the wooden benches creaked beneath the weight of neighbors, ranchers, and small business owners. A faded American flag hung at the back wall above a bulletin board plastered with lost dog flyers and church bake sale notices. Normally this hall hosted Sunday suppers and rodeo fundraisers. Tonight it felt like a battlefield. When Elena stepped through the doors, the room hushed. Every head turned. For decades, she'd been more than a rancher. She'd been the one who lent a tractor when someone's broke, the woman who stayed up all night branding cattle when a neighbor's family fell sick. People respected her, trusted her. But trust didn't mean unity. A wiry man in a cowboy hat spoke first. His voice rough as gravel. Elena, is it true? Sullivan Energy's talking, Torres land. Elena's jaw tightened. She held up the envelope, its official seal visible even from the back row. It's true. 30 days. And it won't stop with me. They've filed for eminent domain across half this county. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some cursed under their breath. Others hung their heads. They're offering double market value, another man said, standing near the back. His name was Travis Holt, a rancher always one bad season away from foreclosure. That's more money than I've ever seen. Maybe it ain't the worst deal. Elena's eyes burned. Double market value won't buy back history. It won't feed your cattle when they're gone, or raise your children on the soil your fathers bled for. Once Sullivan takes this land, it's not yours. It never will be again. A woman in the second row, Martha, who ran the diner, stood and wrung her apron in her hands. But what choice do we have? They've got lawyers, politicians. Folks like us, we can't fight that. Before Elena could answer, Maya stepped forward. The blazer she'd worn from California was wrinkled from the road, but she stood tall, her voice steady. Yes, they have power, she said, projecting her words into the rafters. But the law doesn't give them everything. Eminent domain isn't a blank check. They have to prove public interest, not corporate profit. And I'll fight them on that, line by line, clause by clause. Some heads lifted at her words, a spark of hope flickering. But Travis scoffed. And who are you, girl? Your book's smart, sure, but you ain't never faced men like Sullivan. They'll chew you up. Maya didn't flinch. Then let them try. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Some rallied behind Elena and Maya, pounding fists on benches in agreement. Others argued that survival meant compromise. A few muttered about selling out early, before Sullivan's men drove prices down. Elena raised her hands, silencing the noise. Her voice cut through, sharp as barbed wire. Listen to yourselves. We're fighting over scraps before the wolves even arrive. Sullivan Energy wants us divided. That's how they win. We either stand together or we fall one by one. The crowd quieted. At the far corner, Ben Carter scribbled furiously into his notepad. The investigative journalist had slipped in quietly, dressed down in jeans and a flannel shirt, but his keen eyes missed nothing. He'd been chasing stories of corporate land grabs for months, and now, right in front of him, was the fight of a lifetime. I'll tell you one thing, Elena said, her voice steady now. They picked the wrong ranch to start with. They think we're just dirt farmers too tired to fight. But this land isn't for sale. Not mine, not yours. They'll have to drag me off it before I hand it over." Applause burst from half the room, cheers echoing off the wooden walls. The other half stayed silent, weighed down by fear, by doubt. As the meeting broke apart into heated clusters, Elena felt Maya's hand slip into hers. Her daughter's grip was firm, her eyes alight with fire. "You did good," Maya whispered. Elena forced a small smile, though inside her chest the storm raged. She had rallied some, but she had also seen the cracks. Fear was Sullivan's sharpest weapon, and it was already cutting through her neighbors. She glanced toward the corner, where Ben Carter watched her with the intensity of a man who smelled a story bigger than headlines. He gave her a small nod as though to say, "I see you.
Believe you."
Elena didn't know if that belief would be enough. But tonight, as the Texas wind rattled the thin windows of the hall, she knew one thing for certain. This fight had just gone public, and Sullivan Energy had no idea what storm was coming. The night after the town meeting, the Torres ranch was quiet, but it was not peaceful. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind carried with it the uneasy murmur of a community divided. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the eviction notice spread out in front of her like a wound that wouldn't close. The paper was creased, stained by the sweat of her palms, but its words cut sharper with each reading. Across from her, Maya pored over a thick legal book she'd pulled from her duffel bag. The lamp above flickered, casting long shadows on the faded linoleum floor. Her daughter looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her jaw was set the way Elena remembered from when she was a little girl. Stubborn, unyielding. "Mama," Maya said without looking up, "this isn't just about you. They're targeting half the county. I saw the filings in the courthouse records this afternoon. Sullivan wants everything from here to the state highway." Elena's stomach clenched. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it aloud made it real. That man won't stop until he's paved over every pasture in Texas. Maya closed the book with a sharp snap. "Then we won't let him." Elena studied her daughter. Maya had always been the academic one, the dreamer with her nose in books, chasing opportunities beyond the ranch. Elena had encouraged it, even when it meant long nights alone, mending fences by lantern light. She hadn't wanted this hard life for her daughter. Yet here she was, back in the dust and heat, ready to fight. "You've got school," Elena said softly. "A future that doesn't look like this." Maya leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "This is my future. This ranch is my blood too. You raised me here, you taught me what it means to fight for something worth keeping. If I walk away now, what does that say about me?" Elena opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to protect Maya, to shield her from the ugliness of corporate greed and political corruption. But Maya was no longer a child. She was a woman now, with fire in her chest and the law at her fingertips. Before Elena could answer, headlights swept across the window. A truck crunched up the gravel drive. Elena rose, tension rippling through her body, but when the door creaked open, it was only Sheriff Daniels. A heavy-set man in his 60s, hat in hand, his expression uneasy. "Elena," he said, voice low, "you stirred up a hornet's nest tonight." Elena crossed her arms. "Good. Let 'em sting." The sheriff sighed. "You know, I've always respected your family. But Sullivan's got the governor's ear, half the county commissioners in his pocket. You and that daughter of yours are picking a fight you can't win." Maya stepped forward before her mother could speak. "With all due respect, Sheriff, justice isn't about who's got the deeper pockets. It's about the law. And the law doesn't belong to Sullivan." The old lawman's eyes flicked to her, surprised at her fire. He shifted uncomfortably, then tipped his hat. "Just be careful. Not everyone out here plays fair." With that, he left, his taillights disappearing into the night. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Elena sank back into her chair, running her hands over her face. Maya stood tall, fists clenched. "That's exactly why we have to fight," Maya said firmly. If even the sheriff is afraid, then who's left? It has to be us. For the first time in years, Elena saw herself reflected in her daughter, not just in the dark eyes they shared, but in the fire that refused to be put out. It was both terrifying and comforting. The next morning, the ranch buzzed with unusual energy. Elena saddled her horse, while Maya stood by the barn, cell phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapidly with a contact from her law school. She was already pulling favors, digging for precedents, learning every loophole Sullivan might exploit. Later, as they drove into town in the beat-up pickup, Maya turned to her mother. I know this feels impossible, but I also know men like Sullivan. They think people like us won't fight back. That's their blind spot. Elena gripped the steering wheel tighter, her eyes on the dusty horizon. And if we lose? Maya's lips curled into a determined smile. Then we make sure losing costs them more than they ever expected. At the courthouse steps, reporters waited. Small-town journalists, bloggers, even Ben Carter. His camera slung around his neck. The story was spreading faster than Sullivan's men could contain it. And in the center of it all stood Elena Torres, a rancher who refused to bend, and her daughter Maya, returning not as a child coming home, but as an ally ready for war. The fight for the land had become more than survival. It was the opening move in a battle that would shake both Rio Verde and the glittering towers of Wall Street. And for the first time since the eviction notice, Elena felt something stir beneath the fear. Hope sharpened into resolve. The morning news broke like a thunderclap across Texas. Elena stood in the diner, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling on the counter, as the muted television mounted above the pie case flickered with the polished smile of Jack Sullivan. The cheerin at the bottom read, Sullivan Energy, pioneering America's clean future. The CEO of Sullivan Energy Holdings looked every bit the part of a savior. Silver hair neatly combed back, a bespoke navy suit tailored to perfection. His words smooth as honey. But Elena heard only venom. Our goal, Sullivan said, voice confident, is to bring prosperity and clean energy to communities that have long struggled. This project is about jobs, innovation, and ensuring America leads the world in sustainability. Unfortunately, a small group of individuals are standing in the way of progress. While we respect private concerns, we cannot allow outdated mindsets to jeopardize the future. The camera cut to a graphic, a map of Rio Verde County, shaded in bright green, with words Clean Energy Corridor flashing beneath. Then an image of Elena's ranch appeared. Her land, her cattle, her fences, next to the words, Opposition Stronghold. Gasps rippled through the diner. All eyes turned to Elena. She didn't flinch, but her blood boiled. Sullivan had made her the villain in his story. Martha, the diner owner, hurried over and turned down the volume, her face pale. Elena. I didn't know they'd go this far. Elena forced her jaw to unclench. Oh, they'll go farther. This is just the opening shot. Across the county, Sullivan's message spread like wildfire. Billboards appeared overnight on highways. Clean energy for Texas. Don't let fear hold us back. Radio ads painted the opposition as selfish ranchers unwilling to embrace progress. Online articles, clearly planted by Sullivan's PR machine, framed Elena as stubborn, obstructionist, even dangerous. By noon, the whispers had started. At the feed store, two neighbors she'd known since childhood averted their eyes. At the post office, someone muttered, maybe it's time she let go. But it was when Maya stormed into the ranch house, phone in hand, that Elena realized the full scale of the strike. They're using social media bots, Maya said, her voice shaking with fury. She dropped her phone onto the table, the screen alive with comments under Sullivan's video. These ranchers don't care about America's future. Elena Torres is standing in the way of clean jobs. Sell the land, senora, and stop crying. Maya's hands trembled. They're trying to erase everything you are. Everything we are. Elena took the phone gently, setting it aside. Let them talk. I've faced drought, debt, and storms that could tear a roof clean off. Words don't scare me. But even as she spoke, she knew this was different. Droughts ended. Storms passed. Sullivan's storm was endless, fed by money and power. That evening, the town meeting hall filled again, this time not by choice, but because Sullivan had sent his representatives. Men in crisp suits handed out glossy pamphlets promising jobs, healthcare clinics, and infrastructure improvements. They spoke of progress, as though it were a gift wrapped in gold. And then came the knife. One of Sullivan's representatives cleared his throat and said, "We have to be honest with you. As long as Mrs. Torres and a few others continue their obstruction, these benefits will be delayed. This community could thrive, but only if everyone participates." A hush fell over the room. Elena felt the stares prickling her back. It wasn't just a battle for her land anymore. It was a battle for loyalty, for the soul of Rio Verde. Sullivan wasn't just fighting her. He was turning her neighbors into weapons. Maya stood abruptly, her blazer catching the light. "You call this progress? Taking from families who've lived here for generations. That's not prosperity. It's theft dressed up in buzzwords." Some clapped. Others stayed quiet. A few shook their heads. Fear was winning ground. Ben Carter, leaning against the wall with his notepad, scribbled furiously. His camera clicked once, catching the moment Elena rose to her feet. She didn't plan to speak, but her voice thundered anyway. "You can call me obstructionist. You can plaster my ranch on your screens and say I'm the problem. But let me tell you something. Jack Sullivan doesn't care about this town. He doesn't care about your families or your jobs. He cares about power. And the day we start trading our birthright for his promises is the day we lose more than land. We lose who we are." Applause broke out, louder this time, echoing against the rafters. Sullivan's men shifted uncomfortably. But Elena saw it, the cracks of doubt spreading among her neighbors. As the meeting ended, Ben approached her, lowering his voice. "They've declared war on you in the media. You need to be ready for what comes next. This isn't just local anymore. You're on Sullivan's radar now." Elena met his gaze, steady as stone. "Good. Then he knows where to find me." Outside, under the wide Texas sky, the neon lights of the diner flickered, casting the town in uneasy glow. The first strike had landed, hard and heavy. But Elena Torres was still standing. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The war for her land had only just begun. Ben Carter had been chasing stories like this for years. Quiet wars fought in boardrooms, small towns swallowed whole by corporations that called it progress. He knew the playbook. Polished press releases, smiling executives, legal loopholes dressed as inevitabilities. But what he heard at the Rio Verde town hall lit a fire in him. Jack Sullivan wasn't just building a clean energy project. He was dismantling a way of life. That night, Ben drove 2 hours back to his small apartment in Austin. He poured a cup of cheap coffee, set his recorder on the table, and opened his laptop. The glow of the screen lit the stacks of files he'd already collected. Property seizure cases in New Mexico, community buyouts in Oklahoma, suspiciously fast permitting approvals in Louisiana. Sullivan's name was always there, sometimes up front, sometimes buried deep. But the pattern wasn't enough. He needed proof. He leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes, until he remembered something from earlier that week. An email forwarded by a source inside the state's Energy Commission. It was nothing special at first glance. Meeting minutes from a subcommittee on renewable infrastructure. But one line had caught his eye. Phase 2 expansion contingent upon financial instrument clearance. Financial instruments. That wasn't the language of clean energy. That was Wall Street's language. Ben dug deeper. He called his source, a weary mid-level analyst named Richard who owed him a favor. "You want me to lose my job?" Richard hissed. "You want to keep drinking water that doesn't catch fire when you light a match?" Ben shot back. Silence. Then Richard exhaled. "Check the filings under Green Horizon Capital. That's all I can tell you." Ben worked until dawn, chasing digital breadcrumbs. Finally he found it. A shell corporation, Green Horizon Capital, owned quietly by Sullivan Energy Holdings. Its purpose: not building turbines or solar grids, but packaging land rights into financial securities, tradable on Wall Street, bundled and sold like mortgage-backed loans before the crash of 2008. The Clean Future Initiative wasn't about energy. It was about leverage. Sullivan was turning ranches and family land into collateral for a financial game no farmer in Rio Verde could ever win. Ben sat back, his heart pounding. He opened a drawer and pulled out a battered leather notebook. He began scribbling furiously. Names, connections, dollar figures. His handwriting angled sharp with urgency. But the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. By mid-morning, his phone buzzed with an unlisted number. "Mr. Carter," a voice said smoothly, "we hear you've been asking questions about our operations. We'd hate for you to waste your time or jeopardize your career on misunderstandings." The line went dead. Ben froze, the hair on his neck prickling. They were watching him already. He closed the blinds, locked the door, and backed up his files to a drive he kept hidden inside a hollowed-out book on his shelf. He'd played this game before. Survival meant paranoia. By the time evening came, Ben was back in Rio Verde. The ranch looked different now, less like a quiet stretch of land and more like the front line of a war. Elena was fixing a broken fence post when he pulled up. Maya sat on the porch, phone in hand, typing furiously, probably drafting another legal argument. Ben approached, holding a folder stuffed with printouts. His voice was low, urgent. "You need to see this." Inside the kitchen, papers spilled across the table. Elena's brow furrowed as she scanned them. Maya's eyes widened, fury flashing behind her glasses. "They're not building clean energy," Ben said, tapping one page. "They're building a financial weapon. Your land, everyone's land, is just fuel for Wall Street. Once they own it, they'll slice it into securities, sell it off to investors, and leave this town with nothing but debt and broken promises." Maya's fists clenched. "If we can prove this, they'll try to bury it," Elena finished, her voice grim. Ben nodded. "That's why I need both of you. Can publish a story, sure. But they'll call it fake news, spin it as conspiracy. If we want this to stick, we need witnesses. Court filings. Voices from this town who won't back down when Sullivan's lawyers come knocking." Elena looked at him hard, searching his face for weakness. What she saw was a man tired of running half-finished stories, tired of watching the powerful rewrite the truth. For once, she believed him. "We don't scare easy here," she said finally. "If Sullivan wants a war, we'll give him one." Ben allowed himself a small smile, though he knew the danger had just multiplied. He packed his notes carefully back into the folder. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under a blood-red sunset, the kind that painted the horizon with fire. It was beautiful, but it carried an omen too. For Elena, Maya, and Ben, there was no turning back. They had the documents. They had the truth. And Jack Sullivan would do anything to keep it buried. The courthouse in San Marcos wasn't built for drama. Its limestone walls and wooden benches usually hosted traffic disputes, land inheritance hearings, or the occasional bar fight gone too far. But on this sweltering July morning, the small courtroom pulsed with something heavier. The first direct clash between the Torres family and Sullivan Energy. Elena sat stiff-backed at the plaintiff's table, her weathered hands folded tightly in her lap. Beside her stood Maya, blazer pressed, hair neatly tied back, eyes sharp with the intensity of someone who'd been rehearsing arguments in her head all night. She wasn't a licensed attorney yet, just a law student, but with no lawyer in the county willing to risk angering Sullivan Energy, Maya had stepped into the role without hesitation. On the opposite side of the room, Jack Sullivan himself had deigned to attend. He sat surrounded by a team of suited attorneys, his silver hair gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights, a half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth as though the entire proceeding were an amusing inconvenience. The presence of cameras, allowed under Texas open court rules, didn't bother him. In fact, he seemed to perform for them. Judge Rowe, a weary man with spectacles sliding down his nose, called the session to order. We are here regarding the petition of Sullivan Energy Holdings for eminent domain acquisition of land parcels in Rio Verde County, including property owned by Ms. Elena Torres. Ms. Torres has filed an objection. Maya rose. Her voice, steady but brimming with fire, filled the chamber. Your Honor, Sullivan Energy's petition is built on false pretenses. They claim this land seizure serves the public interest, but their own filings reveal otherwise. This isn't about clean energy, it's about financial speculation. They plan to securitize land rights and trade them as investment instruments, leaving our community gutted while Wall Street profits. Gasps murmured through the courtroom. The judge adjusted his glasses. Do you have evidence of this claim? Yes, Maya said, sliding a folder onto the bench. Inside were copies of the documents Ben had uncovered. Corporate filings, shell company structures, contracts signed under Green Horizon Capital. The lead attorney for Sullivan Energy rose smoothly, his tone dripping with dismissal. Your Honor, opposing counsel, if I may even use that term, as Ms. Torres is not a licensed attorney, relies on conjecture and illegally obtained documents. Our client's initiative is a matter of public record, backed by state approval. This objection is nothing more than an emotional plea from a family unwilling to embrace progress. Maya bristled, but before she could respond, Elena touched her arm gently. The rancher's eyes said, "Stay calm. Stay sharp." Maya straightened. With respect, this isn't emotion. It's fact. If Sullivan Energy truly intended to build a clean energy corridor, why hide their financing behind shell corporations? Why securitize land deeds like mortgage bonds? This isn't innovation. It's exploitation. All eyes flicked toward Sullivan. For the first time, the CEO's smile faltered just slightly. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something before smoothing his expression once again. The judge flipped through the pages, brow furrowing. I will admit these filings raise questions. But Ms. Torres, you must understand this court is bound by state statutes. Eminent domain law favors public benefit. The burden is high to prove otherwise. Maya met his gaze, unflinching. Then let me be clear, Your Honor. What Sullivan Energy calls progress will strip generations of families of their homes, their culture, their dignity. If the law doesn't protect that, then the law has failed. The courtroom went still. Even the reporters in the back stopped typing. The judge tapped his gavel once. I will review this evidence and issue a preliminary ruling. Until then, Ms. Torres's land cannot be seized. A low rumble of relief swept through the room. Elena exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. It wasn't victory, but it was a reprieve. As people began to file out, Jack Sullivan stood, buttoning his suit jacket. His eyes found Elena's across the room, then shifted to Maya. He walked slowly toward their table, ignoring the cameras, leaning down just enough for his words to be audible only to them. You gave them a show today, he said smoothly. But don't mistake a pause for a win. 30 days from now, this court will side with progress. And when it does, you'll both be nothing more than footnotes in a story already written. Maya's chin lifted. We write our own stories, Mr. Sullivan. For a moment the mask cracked. His eyes hardened, cold as steel. Then he straightened, flashing that camera-ready smile again as he left the courtroom with his entourage. Ben Carter appeared at their side, notebook in hand, camera slung over his shoulder. You realize you just bought yourselves a war, right? He said quietly. Elena stood, her hand on Maya's shoulder. Then it's a good thing we came prepared for one. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with reporters shouting questions, microphones thrust forward. Maya shielded her eyes against the Texas sun, the roar of voices echoing in her ears. She felt the weight of what had just happened. Her first courtroom stand, her first strike against a giant. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But for the first time she believed they could win. The July night was heavy with silence. Out on the Torres ranch, cicadas buzzed in the mesquite trees, and the cattle shifted restlessly in the dark pastures. Elena had just begun to drift into a shallow sleep when the smell hit her. Sharp, acrid, unmistakable. Smoke. Her eyes snapped open. For a split second, she thought it might be a dream, but then the sound came, the distant crackle of flames carried on the night wind. She bolted upright, grabbing her boots from beside the bed. "Elena!" Maya's voice rang from down the hall, panicked. By the time Elena burst through the front door, her daughter was already on the porch, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes wide with terror. The barn was ablaze. Flames clawed into the night sky, turning the wooden beams into torches. Sparks rained across the corral as frightened cattle bellowed and kicked at the fences. The fire's heat hit Elena like a wall, searing her skin even from yards away. "Call the fire department," Elena shouted, sprinting toward the barn. Maya fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. Elena's boots pounded against the hard-packed dirt as she reached the paddock, unhooking the latches and driving the cattle away from the flames. The animals scattered into the fields, hooves thundering like a stampede. "Mom!" Maya screamed. "It's spreading to the shed." Elena turned. She saw it, embers leaping from the barn roof onto the storage shed where she kept feed and equipment. If that caught, half the ranch would go up before the fire trucks arrived. She grabbed a hose, turned the spigot, and aimed the thin stream at the roof, knowing it was useless but unwilling to stop. Sweat and smoke stung her eyes. Her throat burned with each breath. Headlights appeared on the dirt road, neighbors rushing in, drawn by the orange glow. Trucks skidded into the yard, men leaping out with buckets, shovels, anything they could carry. Someone brought a water tank hitched to a flatbed, spraying desperately at the flames. But the barn was already collapsing. With a deafening crack, the roof caved in, sending a fountain of sparks into the air. Maya shrieked and stumbled back, covering her mouth with her arm. Through the chaos, Elena's mind burned with a single thought. This wasn't an accident. The barn had been inspected 2 months earlier. No faulty wiring, no loose lanterns. She knew her land, knew its risks. This was deliberate. Someone had struck in the dead of night to send a message. Stand against Sullivan, and you'll burn for it. Sheriff Daniels arrived 20 minutes later. Sirens wailing, lights painting the smoke red and blue. By then, the barn was nothing but charred ruins, smoldering embers glowing like the coals of hell. The sheriff walked slowly among the wreckage, his flashlight beam cutting through the haze. He kicked at a piece of blackened timber, then crouched. When he stood again, his face was pale. "What is it?" Elena demanded, her voice hoarse. He hesitated. Then he opened his palm. In it lay a melted red plastic canister. Gasoline. Maya gasped. Neighbors muttered angrily. One spat into the dirt. "Arson," Elena said flatly. The sheriff nodded grimly. "We'll investigate." Elena's laugh was bitter, sharp as barbed wire. "Investigate. We all know who did this. Sullivan's men don't fight fair. They don't fight in the daylight." The sheriff glanced at the gathering crowd, then lowered his voice. "Careful, Elena. You start throwing accusations without proof, you'll only hurt yourself." Ben Carter, standing with his camera slung over his shoulder, spoke up. "Proof won't be hard to find. You don't burn down a barn in a county this small without someone seeing something." "I'll get it." Elena met his eyes. He wasn't bluffing. For the first time that night, she felt a spark of control through the smoke and ruin. Maya touched her arm. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes red but fierce. "Mom, this changes everything. They're not just trying to take the land anymore. They're trying to scare us into surrendering." Elena looked back at the blackened skeleton of the barn, the place where she'd raised her first calf, where her father had taught her to mend saddles, where she'd kissed Maya's forehead on nights too stormy to sleep. Gone turned to ash. Her chest tightened, but her voice came out steady. "Then they'll learn something about me. I don't scare easy." The neighbors nodded. A few murmured words of support. Others stayed quiet, fear still gnawing at them. But Elena knew the fire had lit more than her barn. It had lit a fuse. Somewhere, in an office high above New York or Austin, Jack Sullivan was smiling, certain this would break her. But he didn't understand what he'd created. He hadn't destroyed the Torres ranch. He'd forged it into a battlefield. The smell of smoke still clung to Elena's hair, her clothes, her skin. Even after 3 showers, it refused to leave, a phantom reminder of the barn that had collapsed in flames. 2 days had passed since the fire, but the image haunted her every time she closed her eyes. Sparks leaping into the sky, the roof caving with a deafening crack, the land she had sworn to protect burning under a moonlit sky. The insurance man had come and gone, shaking his head. "Looks like arson, ma'am, but without a suspect we can't do much." His words felt rehearsed, the kind you gave when you already knew the fight was bigger than paperwork. By evening, Elena sat alone in the Rio Verde diner, tucked into a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. Outside, neon lights buzzed, casting a sickly glow across the empty parking lot. She hadn't told Maya where she was going. Her daughter needed rest, not another sleepless night chasing ghosts. The doorbell jingled. Ben Carter stepped inside. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair tousled, a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. He spotted Elena immediately, slid into the booth across from her, and ordered nothing. His eyes were sharp, restless. "You didn't come here for coffee," Elena said, voice low. Ben set the satchel on the table, flipping it open to reveal a stack of documents, photographs, and a flash drive. "I came here because you're the only one in this county stubborn enough to fight back. And because I think Sullivan just showed us his hand." Elena's gaze hardened. "The fire." Ben nodded. "They wanted fear. Not just for you, for everyone. You saw it, didn't you? Neighbors who whispered support at the courthouse now keep their distance. Fear's a cleaner weapon than fire. It lingers longer." Elena clenched her jaw. "Then we burn it out." Ben leaned in. "That's where this comes in." He slid a set of papers toward her. Corporate memos, financial ledgers, emails printed in black and white. Words jumped from the page. Green Horizon Capital, asset securitization, bundled land rights. "They're not building turbines and solar grids," Ben continued. "They're turning your land and every acre they seize into financial products. Sliced, bundled, sold off on Wall Street. That barn fire was stage 1. Pressure you, break you, then buy out the rest cheap and sell the whole county like stock." Elena skimmed the documents, her pulse quickening. She didn't understand all the financial jargon, but she understood theft when she saw it. This wasn't progress. It was predation. "You put this out in the paper," she said. "Expose it. People will turn against him." Ben shook his head. "Not enough. Sullivan's PR machine will spin it as conspiracy theory before the ink dries. I've seen it before. Truth doesn't beat money on its own. But," he lowered his voice, "truth plus resistance. That scares them." Elena frowned. "You mean us?" Ben gave a tight smile. "Exactly. You've got something Sullivan doesn't, roots. People here trust you. They might be afraid, but they know you. And you've got Maya. She can fight him in court while I drag his name through every media outlet that'll print it. Together, we make it harder for him to silence the story." The waitress passed by, refilling Elena's mug without asking. She glanced at the stack of papers curiously, then moved on. Elena stared at the steam curling from the coffee, weighing her next words. "All my life," she said slowly, "I've fought storms, drought, debt. I always thought the land was the enemy. But this," she tapped the memos, "this is worse. Because it's smiling while it steals." Ben's expression softened. "Then don't fight alone. Let me help." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of neon and the clink of dishes from the kitchen. Then Elena extended her hand across the booth. Her grip was firm, unshaking. "All right, Carter. We fight together." Ben clasped her hand. "Then we start now." They spent hours in that booth, planning in hushed tones. Ben would dig deeper into Sullivan's shell companies, tracing the money trail through New York banks and Cayman Islands accounts. Elena would rally the ranchers still brave enough to stand, quietly at first, so Sullivan's men wouldn't catch wind. Maya would prepare filings that challenged the legitimacy of Sullivan's eminent domain claims, forcing delay after delay until the truth could surface. By the time they rose from the booth, the diner was nearly empty, chairs flipped onto tables for the night. Elena stepped out into the cool Texas air, feeling the weight of what they had agreed to. She had lost a barn, but she had gained an ally. And that meant something. As Ben walked to his car, he glanced back once. You know he won't stop, right? He'll come harder now. Maybe at you. Maybe at me. Elena adjusted her hat, eyes hard as flint. Then let him. I've fought men with bigger egos than Jack Sullivan. Difference is, this time I'm not fighting alone. The night stretched out over the prairie, stars blazing above like watchful eyes. For the first time since the fire, Elena felt the faintest spark of hope. The kind of hope that didn't whisper. The kind that promised war. The wind was sharp that morning, rattling the loose tin roof of the porch and carrying with it the smell of charred wood that still lingered from the fire. Elena Torres stood at the edge of her ranch house, boots planted on the weathered boards, staring out at the pasture. Her barn was gone, her fences half mended, her cattle skittish. Every scar on the land felt like a scar on her own skin. But today wasn't about scars. Today was about refusing to bow. Maya had been insistent. If Sullivan can control the media, we'll make our own, she'd said, pacing the living room with her phone clutched tight. We go live. No filters. No spin. Let people hear it from you. Elena had resisted at first. She wasn't a politician, wasn't a speechmaker. She was a rancher. Her voice was meant for corralling cattle, not addressing strangers on the internet. But the fire had changed something. If she stayed silent, Sullivan's story would become the truth. So she agreed. Now, as the sun rose over the Texas horizon, painting the fields in amber light, a small crowd gathered in front of her porch. Neighbors, some loyal, some curious, stood in dusty boots and Sunday clothes. A few carried handmade signs. Save our land, no to Sullivan Energy. At the edge of the group, Ben Carter adjusted his camera, while Maya positioned a smartphone on a tripod. You're live in 3-2, Maya whispered. Elena's throat tightened. For a heartbeat, she considered turning away, retreating inside, letting the silence swallow her. But then she thought of her father's calloused hands guiding hers on the reins, of Maya's eyes blazing with determination, of the barn burning in the midnight sky. She lifted her chin. Good morning, she began, her voice steady, though her hands curled into fists at her sides. My name is Elena Torres. This land behind me has been my family's home for 3 generations. It's where my father taught me to ride, where my daughter took her first steps, where we fought drought and debt and every storm nature could throw our way. But nothing prepared me for what we face now. The crowd hushed. Maya's phone streamed every word to hundreds, then thousands of screens across the country. 2 weeks ago, Sullivan Energy told me my land no longer belonged to me. They called it progress. They called it clean energy. But let me tell you the truth. This isn't progress. It's theft. They want to turn our homes into financial products, to slice and sell our heritage to Wall Street while leaving us with ashes. And if you think it ends here, you're wrong. What happens in Rio Verde will happen in your town too, if we let it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. Someone shouted, "Tell it, Elena." She raised her voice, the wind carrying her words across the fields. I've been called stubborn. I've been called old-fashioned. But I will not be called silent. This is our land, our dignity, our future. And I'm telling Jack Sullivan right now. You may have money, you may have power, but you do not own us. Cheers erupted, raw and unfiltered. Cameras flashed. Ben zoomed in, catching the fire in Elena's eyes as she pointed toward the horizon. Progress without justice is nothing but greed, she said, her voice ringing. We won't surrender. We won't sell. And if you're listening out there, if you've ever been told your voice doesn't matter, know this. They only win when we stop speaking. And I'm not stopping. The crowd roared. People raised their fists, chanting her name. Within an hour, the video had spread far beyond Rio Verde. Local shares turned into statewide attention. By afternoon, hashtags trended. Hashtag stand with Elena, hashtag save Rio Verde, hashtag land not for sale. By evening, national outlets were replaying clips of her speech on primetime news. Her words spliced between polished soundbites of Sullivan Energy executives insisting the project was for the good of all Texans. But the contrast was stark. On one side, a billionaire in a skyscraper. On the other, a woman in boots and denim, standing on a porch with her land stretching endless behind her. And America knew which story felt true. At the ranch that night, Elena sat exhausted, still in the same clothes she'd worn that morning. Maya burst into the room, phone in hand, grinning. Mom, you hit 2 million views. People from New York to California are sharing your speech. You've gone viral. Elena frowned. Viral. It means, Maya explained breathlessly, you're not just fighting for Rio Verde anymore. You're fighting for everyone who's ever been pushed off their land. And they're watching. They're with us. Ben leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Sullivan thought he could paint you as a villain. Instead, he just handed you the spotlight. Elena looked down at her hands, rough, scarred, stained with a lifetime of labor. Hands not built for fame but for survival. She wasn't sure what to make of this sudden attention, this tidal wave of strangers chanting her name. But one thing she did know, the war had shifted. It was no longer just about 30 days and a legal notice. It was about a movement. And movements had the power to topple giants. The diner was busier than usual that night, a strange tension hanging over every conversation. Farmers and ranchers clustered in booths, whispering about Elena's speech that had gone viral. Some smiled at her with quiet respect when she walked in. Others turned away, avoiding her eyes. Elena noticed. She'd lived in Rio Verde her whole life. She knew the difference between fear and loyalty. Fear was winning. She slid into a booth with Maya and Ben. Ben set down his camera bag, lowering his voice. Word is Sullivan's sending more men this week. PR consultants, lawyers, maybe even lobbyists. They're tightening the noose. Maya straightened. Then we tighten our case. Every day we stall them is a day more people wake up to the truth. Before Elena could respond, the doorbell jingled. Travis Holt walked in, hat pulled low, boots dusty from the fields. Travis wasn't just a neighbor. He'd been one of Elena's closest friends since childhood. Their families had worked cattle drives together. He'd stood by her side at her husband's funeral. "Elena," he said, spotting her. His tone was heavy, conflicted. "Got a minute?" She gestured for him to sit. Travis slid into the booth, eyes darting around like a man with too many secrets. "I need you to understand," he began, voice low. "Sullivan came to me. Offered to buy my land at triple value. Enough to clear every debt I've got and send my kids to college." I signed. Elena's chest tightened. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him. "You what?" Travis looked down at his hands. "I can't fight him, Lena. None of us can. You're strong, but me. I've been drowning in bills for years. This was my way out. I didn't see another choice." Maya's jaw dropped. "So you just gave him exactly what he wanted. You let him use you to break everyone else's resolve." Travis winced. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," Ben cut in, his voice sharp. "You think Sullivan just wanted your land? Well, he wanted a crack in the wall. And you gave it to him." Elena raised a hand, silencing them. Her gaze was fixed on Travis, her friend, the man who had once carried hay bales alongside her father, who had laughed with her around campfires. "Tell me the truth, Travis. Did you just sell your land, or did you sell me too?" Travis's silence was answer enough. Elena leaned back, the betrayal sinking like lead into her chest. So that's it. He owns you now. Travis's eyes glistened, shame flickering in them. I'm sorry, Lena. I really am. But you're fighting a war you can't win. Better to survive than to burn. He stood quickly, adjusting his hat, and walked out, leaving the booth in heavy silence. Maya slammed her fist against the table. How could he? After everything. Elena didn't answer. She stared at the condensation dripping down her glass, fighting to keep her composure. Betrayal didn't always come from strangers. It came from people who once swore they'd stand beside you. That cut deeper than Sullivan's propaganda or even the fire. Ben leaned in, his voice low. This is the beginning. Sullivan's strategy isn't just intimidation. It's division. He doesn't have to beat you if he can turn your own people against you. Maya's eyes blazed. Then we expose it. Let the whole world see what he's doing. Elena shook her head slowly. No. If we shame Travis, we shame the others who are wavering. Fear will only grow. We can't fight this war by tearing each other apart. Her daughter bit her lip, frustrated, but Elena's tone was final. Later that night, back at the ranch, the silence was suffocating. Elena stood on the porch, staring at the charred ruins of the barn under the moonlight. Maya joined her, wrapping a blanket over her shoulders. Mom, Maya whispered. What if he's right? What if we can't win? Elena's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Then we make sure losing costs him more than winning ever could. She thought of Travis's bowed head, of the shame in his eyes. Sullivan hadn't just bought land. He'd bought silence, bought surrender. And if more neighbors followed, Elena would be standing on this battlefield alone. But then she remembered the cheers at the town hall, the millions who had watched her video, the strangers who sent messages of support from across the country. Sullivan could buy silence in Rio Verde, but he couldn't buy the voices rising beyond it. Elena clenched her fists. He thinks betrayal will break us. He doesn't understand. It only makes us fight harder. Somewhere far away, in a skyscraper office lined with glass, Jack Sullivan was likely toasting his small victory. But he had underestimated her before. He was underestimating her still. Because Elena Torres didn't just carry the weight of her ranch anymore. She carried the weight of every person who had ever been told to surrender. And betrayal, she knew now, was only the middle of the story, not the end. The chill of New York City in early autumn cut through Maya's blazer as she and Ben climbed the granite steps of the federal courthouse. Towering skyscrapers loomed on all sides, glass and steel catching the gray morning light. Elena walked between them, her boots echoing defiantly against the stone. This was a world far from the dust and mesquite of Texas, yet the fight felt just as personal here. A crowd had gathered outside. Journalists with cameras, activists holding signs, curious passers-by sensing history in the making. Reporters shouted questions as microphones lunged forward. Elena, what does today mean for Rio Verde? Maya, do you believe you can actually win against Sullivan Energy? Mr. Carter, are the leaked documents authentic? Ben kept his head low, clutching the leather satchel that carried the evidence he had spent weeks compiling. Inside were hundreds of pages, emails, financial filings, photographs, all proving Sullivan's grand project was a financial shell game. Maya stopped at the top of the steps, turning toward the crowd. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, nerves tugging at her resolve. Then she remembered the night of the barn fire, the smell of smoke in her hair, the look on her mother's face. Her voice rang clear. We're not just here for my family's land. We're here because Sullivan Energy has lied. To investors, to regulators, and to the American people. This isn't clean energy. It's theft dressed up in green. And today we put the truth on the record. The crowd erupted with shouts and camera flashes. Sullivan's black limousine pulled up across the street, flanked by bodyguards. Out stepped Jack Sullivan, calm as ever. His navy suit immaculate, his smile polished. He waved to the cameras like a man arriving at his own celebration. Elena, he called out smoothly. his voice carrying across the plaza. Still clinging to fantasies. Elena didn't dignify him with an answer. She turned and walked inside. The hearing room buzzed with tension. The air smelled faintly of old wood and cold metal. Federal officials sat at long tables, their faces impassive. Sullivan's legal team filled one side of the chamber, laptops open, stacks of binders at the ready. On the other side, Maya stood with nothing but a single binder and Ben's satchel. Elena sat directly behind her, hands folded, eyes steady. The lead commissioner spoke. "We will hear arguments regarding the allegations against Sullivan Energy Holdings. Ms. Torres, you may proceed." Maya's pulse pounded. She drew a breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you see before you is not a story about clean energy or progress. It is about power. Sullivan Energy claims their land acquisitions serve the public good. But hidden within their own corporate filings is proof of a different plan. Land rights bundled into securities, sold to Wall Street investors. Communities like Rio Verde are nothing more than collateral." She opened the binder, laying down documents. Ben slid photographs across the table. Internal emails, diagrams of financial structures, records from Green Horizon Capital. The commissioners leaned in, flipping pages. Murmurs spread. Sullivan's attorney rose smoothly. "Your Honor, this is nothing more than a smear campaign fueled by illegally obtained material. Sullivan Energy has always acted within the law. These accusations are baseless and defamatory." Maya countered, her voice sharp. "Then explain this." She held up an email, projected onto the screen. Sullivan's name glared in the header, approving a strategy memo. Phase 2. Securitization of land assets. Target rural acquisitions first. Low resistance, high yield. The room erupted in gasps. Cameras flashed. Sullivan's mask faltered. His jaw tightened as his attorney scrambled for words. The commissioner raised a hand. "Order. We will review this evidence carefully. But it is clear this merits further investigation." Outside the courthouse, the media storm was immediate. Headlines blared across tickers. Sullivan Energy under federal scrutiny. Stocks dipped as news anchors replayed Maya's speech, her words cutting through the noise with clarity. But the real blow came hours later, when the New York Ledger published Ben's exposé online. Within minutes, it spread nationwide. Charts, leaked documents, testimonies from ranchers. The truth could no longer be contained. That evening, Elena, Maya, and Ben stood at the edge of Wall Street, neon signs blazing above them, horns blaring, the city alive with chaos. Sullivan's name scrolled across the giant screen of a financial network, this time not as a visionary, but as a man under fire. Maya looked up at the headlines, her heart pounding. "We did it. We cracked him." Elena placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Not yet. This is just the first real strike. But now the world is watching." For the first time, Jack Sullivan wasn't dictating the story. He was scrambling to survive it. And the Torres women knew, the endgame was near. The first morning after the storm felt different. Not a literal storm, though the Texas sky had unleashed its share of thunder and rain over the weeks, but the storm of headlines, lawsuits, resignations, and stock collapses that followed Sullivan's unraveling on Wall Street. Elena stood on the porch of the ranch, the same porch where she had once delivered a trembling speech into her daughter's phone, never imagining it would ricochet across the nation. The charred barn was gone now, bulldozed to its foundation. In its place rose something new. A steel frame, tall and proud, the skeleton of a community energy hub. Behind it, white turbines spun slowly in the morning wind, their blades catching the dawn. Panels of solar glass gleamed in neat rows across the field where cattle once grazed. It wasn't the same ranch she had inherited from her father, but it wasn't gone either. It was reborn. Maya stepped out beside her, holding a steaming cup of coffee, eyes still heavy from another late night drafting contracts. She handed the cup to her mother with a smile. "The first clients signed yesterday. Cooperative ownership. No outside investors. We did it, Mom." Elena took the mug, her hands wrapping around its warmth. She looked out at the turbines. Feels strange. All these years I thought progress meant losing what we had. Turns out, it just meant building it on our own terms. Down the gravel drive, a group of neighbors arrived. Some who had once wavered even doubted her. They carried toolboxes, spare lumber, welding kits. Among them, Elena spotted Travis Holt, the friend who had sold out, shame carved into his face. He walked slower than the rest, eyes fixed on the ground until finally he looked up. "Elena," he said softly, removing his hat. "I can't undo what I did. But I can help now if you'll let me." For a long moment silence hung heavy. Maya's jaw tightened, ready to protest, but Elena raised a hand. She studied Travis, the weight of betrayal still sharp, but tempered by the sight of the turbines rising in the distance. "You made your choice," she said finally. "But if you're here to build, not to take, then grab a hammer." Relief washed over Travis's face as he joined the others. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it made the future lighter. By mid-morning, the ranch buzzed with work. Panels were hoisted into place. Wires were threaded. Generators hummed. What had begun as a fight to protect a single family's land was now becoming something larger. A shared project, owned by the people who lived here. No hedge fund. No Sullivan. Just them. Ben Carter stood off to the side, camera rolling, documenting the transformation. His article had cracked the dam, but this was the story he wanted to tell. "From ashes to energy," he muttered, jotting notes. The ranch that outplayed Wall Street. At noon, Maya gathered everyone in front of the half-built hub. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper, her voice carrying in the hot Texas air. "Today marks the official founding of Rio Verde Energy Cooperative. Every family that joins owns a share. Every voice has a vote. This isn't just power for our homes, it's power for our community." Applause broke out. Some wiped tears. For the first time in months, fear no longer hung in the air. Elena stepped forward, her voice steadier than it had ever been. "We fought because we had to, but now we build because we choose to." Jack Sullivan thought we were weak. He thought money and fire could silence us. But what he never understood is that roots run deeper than greed. We're still here. And this land still remembers us. The crowd cheered, the sound rolling across the fields like thunder. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and violet, Elena and Maya stood together at the edge of the ranch. The turbines spun against the horizon, steady and strong. Cattle grazed quietly in the pastures nearby, no longer threatened. Maya slipped her arm through her mother's. "You know, people are calling you a symbol now. A hero." Elena chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I'm no hero. I'm just a rancher who got tired of being told her land didn't matter." She paused, eyes narrowing on the distant skyline. "But if my fight shows others they can stand too, then maybe that's enough." Maya leaned her head against her shoulder. "It's more than enough." The wind picked up, carrying with it the hum of the turbines and the scent of earth renewed. For the first time in a long time, Elena felt not just defiance but peace. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something new. The frontier wasn't gone, it had simply changed. And now, she was standing at its edge, ready to claim it. The fight for Rio Verde had started with a piece of paper. An eviction notice. Cold, typed words meant to erase 3 generations of sweat and memory. But in the end, it had become something far larger. Elena Torres didn't just save her land. She redefined what it meant to own it. She stood when others faltered, spoke when silence seemed safer, and proved that one rancher with grit could topple a man who thought himself untouchable. The price had been heavy. Fire, betrayal, the sting of watching neighbors turn away. But every scar carried a story, and those stories became fuel for something new. Maya found her voice not just as a lawyer, but as her mother's equal, carrying the fight from dusty county courthouses to the glass towers of New York. She became proof that the next generation doesn't just inherit land. They inherit the courage to defend it. Ben Carter turned his camera toward a truth others were too afraid to print. In doing so, he reminded the nation that journalism still mattered, that shining a light in dark corners can change the course of history. And the people of Rio Verde, once divided by fear, found strength in unity. The cooperative they built from the ashes wasn't just about energy. It was about dignity, about declaring this is ours and it will stay ours. As for Jack Sullivan, his empire crumbled the way all hollow empires do. Not with a bang, but with the slow, inevitable weight of truth pressing down until it cracked. His towers in New York still glistened, but his name no longer carried the power it once did. On quiet evenings, Elena still stood on her porch, watching the turbines turn. The land no longer felt like a battlefield. Felt like a promise. A promise that roots can outlast greed, that ordinary voices can rise louder than money, and that sometimes the greatest frontier isn't the land beneath your feet, but the courage inside your chest. This wasn't just the story of a rancher. It was the story of every person who has ever been told they don't belong, that they should stay silent, that they can be bought or erased. Elena's story is proof that they are wrong. Because when one woman stood her ground, she didn't just keep her land. She built a new frontier.
Thanks for watching.